I still remember the way the coffee smelled that morning, sharp, metallic, almost like rust lingering in the air. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday brunch at my sister-in-law Nina's house, the kind of monthly ritual that looked picture-perfect from the outside. Her Nashville home was all polished wood floors, sparkling chandeliers, and delicately arranged flowers. But beneath the shine, beneath her practiced smile, there was always something darker. Something that left me unsettled. "My love," James said, as he placed the cup in front of me. "I made this especially for you." His lips stretched into a smile, but his eyes didn't. I was 29, a wife of 3 years, and yet in that moment, I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. The scent from the cup hit me again, sour and chemical, so unlike the smooth aroma of fresh coffee. My stomach churned. Maybe another woman would have lifted it without hesitation, trusting her husband's gesture. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Not after the countless times I'd landed in urgent care after sipping something James or Nina had so kindly offered. The memories flickered like warning lights. Tea at Nina's last month that left me vomiting for hours. Breakfast 2 months ago that ended with me hooked up to IV fluids. Vague excuses from James each time. Maybe it was expired food, maybe your stomach's too sensitive. Always excuses, always doubt. Nina's voice broke through my thoughts. "James has been practicing different brewing methods," she said with a smirk, her spoon swirling lazily in her untouched cup. "Just for you." The way she emphasized those last 3 words made my skin crawl. I forced a smile, though my heart raced. How thoughtful, but my mind was already working, scanning the details. The way Nina watched me intently, the flicker of something exchanged in James's glance. I remembered the whispered conversations that fell silent. Whenever I entered the room, the text messages I glimpsed on his phone with Nina's name lighting up far too often. The pattern was undeniable. I lifted the cup slowly, pretending to take a sip while studying them both. James leaned back, casual, as though waiting for a punchline only he and Nina understood. Nina's lips twitched, her gaze fixed on me like a predator. Something inside me snapped. Enough nights doubled over in pain, enough gaslighting, enough silence. I rose quickly, clutching my phone as if I'd received an urgent call. "Oh, would you look at that? I need to step away for just a minute," I said lightly. As I turned, I let myself stumble, reaching out to steady my hand on the edge of the table. In the confusion, I switched our cups. Nina's cup slid toward me, mine toward her as smoothly as a magician's trick. "I'm such a klutz," I laughed nervously. Nina waved, her hand tight, smile never fading. "Just don't break anything in the study." I nodded and walked away, heart pounding in my chest. But I didn't make the call. Instead, I slipped into the study just far enough that I could still see through the doorway. My eyes locked on Nina as she lifted the cup to her lips. My stomach clenched with dread. Part of me wanted to scream, to knock the cup away, to stop her, but I needed to know. I needed the truth that had haunted me for months. She sipped. And for the first time, it wasn't me who winced. Her hand trembled slightly. She tried to mask it, setting the cup down with forced calm. But I saw it. The pale wash over her face. The faint quiver in her lips. James looked up from his phone, frowning. "James," she whispered, her voice shaky, "something's wrong." He stood so quickly, his chair clattered to the floor. His face blanched as his eyes darted between us, realization dawning. "Nina, no. What did you put as the coffee?" she demanded, clutching the edge of the table. Her words cracked with both fury and fear. I stepped out from the study, then my phone raised, camera recording. "Yes, James," I said evenly. "What exactly did you put in that coffee?" His head whipped toward me, horror spreading across his features. Nina staggered, trying to stand, but her knees buckled. She collapsed into his arms, her body racked with tremors. The silence of the dining room was broken only by the sound of her gasping for breath. James's voice dropped to a whisper, but in the stillness it rang like a confession. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup." I dialed 911, my voice steady, even as my hands shook. "Yes, we need an ambulance. My sister-in-law is having a severe reaction. Address 1542 Maple Grove Drive." Nina's wide eyes found mine, filled with terror. "You switched? You knew?" "Yes," I said softly. "I knew." The paramedics came fast, 15 minutes that stretched like an hour. gloved hands moving with swift precision as they knelt beside Nina. Her lips had gone chalky, the fine tremor in her jaw now a violent shake. "Ma'am, can you hear me? What did you ingest?" one of them asked, voice firm but kind. She tried to speak and only managed a rasp. James hovered uselessly, a frantic metronome pacing 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, hands outstretched, then withdrawn like he couldn't decide whether to touch her or keep his guilt from getting on his skin. I stood at the end of the table with my phone still recording the tiny red dot, a heartbeat of its own. I couldn't bring myself to stop it. I wanted the truth to live somewhere besides my body. They loaded her onto the stretcher oxygen mask, fogging with each shallow breath as they wheeled her to the driveway. James snapped. "Why are you just standing there? Ride with her. Do something." I stared at him and felt the last threads of illusion snap. "You do something," I said softly. "Tell them what you put in the coffee." His eyes skittered away. He followed the stretcher instead. I drove separately, hands clamped to the wheel, the world outside the windshield a smear of late morning sun and panic. In the parking lot, I noticed I was still in my brunch dress and cardigan like a child dressed up for a play that had turned into an autopsy. At the ER doors, the antiseptic air hit me, bleach and fear, and a nurse directed me to the waiting area. James was already there with a clipboard filling in forms and lying through his teeth. "Allergic reaction," I heard him tell the triage nurse. "She sometimes reacts to nuts." The nurse's pen paused. "Do you know what she ate or drank?" James hesitated, the gap so small most people might have missed it. But I saw it like a stone skipping and sinking. "Coffee," he said finally, "just coffee." When they took Nina behind the swinging doors, I sat down across from him. The vinyl seat sighed under my weight. My heart felt older than 29. "You need to tell them the truth," I said. "Right now." He kept writing, the tip of the pen scratching a thin, frantic tattoo across a medical history he was inventing. "What truth?" he said. The performance exhausted me. His chin lifted to just the right angle of indignant innocence, the furrow arranged carefully between his brows. "You switched the cups," he added, blaming me like he was tossing a match and walking away. I leaned forward. "I switched the mugs to survive," I whispered. "Because I have been sick again and again whenever something came from your hands, or hers. Because my body learned to be afraid, before my mind could admit it." His jaw worked. "You're paranoid." I opened my phone and pressed play. His whisper from the dining room spilled into the bright waiting area. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup." His face drained of color, as if the word "supposed" itself had unspooled his script. For a moment, he looked almost childlike, caught, bewildered, stupid with fear. A nurse called my name and asked me to step into a side room. "Are you family?" she said. I nodded. "Sister-in-law." She closed the door gently. "We've stabilized her for now. We drew labs and called for a talk screen. Her vitals are improving." My knees loosened with an ugly relief. Not because I wanted her safe. I didn't know what I wanted for Nina, but because I hadn't come here to watch anyone die. "Do you know if she could have ingested anything unusual?" the nurse asked. "A medication, a cleaner, an herbal extract, anything added to her drink?" I pulled in a breath and felt it scrape. Her coffee had a strange smell. Metallic. I'm not sure what it was. But I have reason to believe someone tampered with it. The nurse's eyes steadied. She nodded once and said, "I'll note the concern and inform the physician." Back in the waiting area, James had disappeared. I found him by the vending machine, staring at his reflection in the plexiglass like it might offer a version of him he could live with. "Where did you get it?" I asked. His head jerked. "What?" "Whatever you put in the cup," I said, voice flat. "Where did you get it?" He laughed, dry, brittle. "You watch too much TV." His hand trembled as he fished for change. A coin fell, rolled in a bright arc, and disappeared under the machine. That's how guilt looked on him. No grand confession, just the clumsy gravity of a life tipping over. I texted my mother and then deleted the text. I texted my friend Maya instead. At ER. It happened. She drank it. He admitted it. I recorded. Three dots pulse then. Come to my place after. Don't be alone with him. I slid the phone into my bag and pictured my kitchen drawer, the one with the warranty papers and the envelope of receipts. For months I had been saving the little scraps of my suspicion urgent care bills, pharmacy printouts, timestamps of group texts, dying mid-sentence anytime I entered a room, a photo of that tea at Nina's with a rainbow sheen on the surface like oil in a puddle. I had kept them because some small stubborn part of me refused to live as a ghost. A doctor in navy scrubs approached us with a calm I wanted to borrow. "She's awake," he said. "We're moving her to observation. We'll have preliminary labs soon. If there's anything we should know about what was in that coffee, now is the time." James lifted his hands. "She's allergic to almonds," he offered weakly. I spoke over him. "I believe the drink was adulterated." The doctor's gaze shifted to me. "By whom?" he asked. I held his gaze and for once didn't protect anyone, by my husband, or by my sister-in-law, or both. Security appears quickly when a doctor's voice goes level like that. They didn't handcuff him. They simply stayed close, which felt like a hand on my back, keeping me from walking into a familiar fire. James hissed, "You're destroying us." I thought of the morning he'd brought me a smoothie after I'd said I wasn't hungry, the way I woke on the bathroom floor, of the broth Nina insisted I take home after I'd politely declined, the way my scalp tingled and my tongue went numb. "We were already destroyed," I said. "You were just pretending not to notice." When they let me see her, Nina lay small and neat under hospital light, as if illness had arranged her. She turned her head when I entered. The oxygen prongs made her look fragile. "You knew," she said, voice papery. "You switched them." I stood at the foot of the bed and didn't move closer. "I knew something," I said. "Enough to be afraid." She swallowed, a tremor passing through her. "It wasn't supposed to be you," she murmured, same words in a different mouth. And I felt cold travel up my spine like a rumor. "Who was it supposed to be then?" I asked, though part of me already understood. Her eyes flicked toward the door, toward where James was somewhere pacing and persuading himself he was still the victim. "He said it would be quick," she whispered. "He said you'd be too weak to fight." A hot, ugly nausea rose in me, the kind that makes memory buckle. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you two been?" The word stuck. She didn't answer, not directly. "He hates when you are loud," she said softly, the syllables floating strange in sterile air. "When you correct him in front of people. He said you make him feel small." I laughed once, a sound like breaking. "He is small," I said. I just stopped pretending he wasn't. The door opened and the doctor stepped in with a printout. He was careful with his voice. "Preliminary talks shows traces consistent with a rodenticide derivative. We've started treatment. She'll remain under observation." The words settled like ash. James had stood in our kitchen at some point and made something meant to kill something small and unimportant, and he had decided I fit the description. The doctor asked if we would consent to speak with hospital security and, if necessary, the police. I said yes before the sentence finished. Nina closed her eyes and nodded barely. In the hallway I leaned against the cool wall and let myself feel the tremor I had been hiding. Not grief. Not yet. Something more like relief's bitter cousin. The lie that had lived in our house had run out of places to hide. I texted myself a list: lawyer locks Bank Maya's couch. Then finally I opened the folder app and saved the video to 3 separate clouds. For months I had begged my body to forgive what my mind couldn't name. Now I had a name. And names have power. When I turned, James was standing at the end of the corridor, arms folded, eyes red. He looked like a man rehearsing sincerity. "We can fix this," he said, and I almost smiled at the poverty of the sentence. "You don't fix poison," I said. "You treat it, you trace it, and you never drink from the same cup again." That night, I didn't go home. I let James pace the fluorescent hallways alone, spinning stories for anyone who would listen. I left the hospital with nothing but my purse and the weight of every truth I had gathered. Outside, the air was heavy with late summer humidity, but it felt cleaner than the stale drafts of our house ever had. I drove straight to Maya's. She opened her door before I even knocked, pulling me into the warmth of her arms. "You're safe," she whispered. But my body didn't believe it yet. I sat at her kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that smelled only of chamomile. Nothing sharp, nothing chemical. I told her everything, how the coffee had smelled, how I'd switched the cups, how Nina's trembling hands had given the whole charade away. When I played the video of James whispering, "That wasn't supposed to be your cup," Maya pressed her fist to her mouth. "You need to take this to the police," she said. "I will." I promised, though part of me still feared what would happen if I did. James had a way of making himself look like the reasonable one, and me the anxious wife, the overly suspicious woman like the problem. But this time I had more than feelings, I had proof. The next morning I went to the bank. My stomach turned as I explained to the clerk that I wanted to freeze our joint accounts. She asked if there was a reason. I simply said, "For my protection." Signing the papers, I felt a strange mixture of grief and empowerment. Grief for the life I thought I had, empowerment for the life I was reclaiming. When I finally went back to the house, I entered like a stranger. The walls seemed to hum with secrets. James's car was in the driveway, but the silence inside was unsettling. He was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten countless meals that now tasted of betrayal. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a mess. "You left me there," he said hoarsely. "You tried to leave me in a grave," I answered, my voice steady. His laugh was bitter. "Do you even hear yourself? You sound crazy." I pulled out my phone and pressed play. His voice filled the kitchen once again. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup." His face collapsed, all color draining. "You," he started, then stopped, rage twisting his features. "I'm going to the police," I told him. "You'll ruin us both," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "No," I said softly. "You already did that." For a long moment, we just stared at each other. The man I had once believed was my partner, my love, was nothing but a stranger with familiar features. Finally he slumped back in his chair, muttering under his breath, "You should have just drunk it." That sentence sealed it. 2 days later I walked into the police station, heart pounding but resolve firm. I handed them the video, the receipts of my medical visits, the urgent care reports, even the tea photo with its rainbow sheen. The officer who took my statement listened carefully, her eyes never leaving mine. When she finished, she said quietly, "You did the right thing." James was questioned that same week. He came home furious, slamming doors, muttering about misunderstandings and false accusations, but his rage no longer touched me. I had already begun packing. Each box I filled felt like a brick lifted off my chest. Meanwhile, Nina remained in the hospital for nearly a week. When she was discharged, she called me. Her voice was weak, threaded with shame. "I didn't know he would go that far," she said. "You were part of it," I replied coldly. "Even if you didn't pour the poison, you helped stir the lies." There was silence on the line, then a whisper. "I think he meant to get rid of both of us eventually." The thought chilled me, but it also steeled me. James had never seen me as a wife or Nina as a sister. We had been pawns, replaceable, disposable. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. By Friday I was gone from the house. I took the essentials, my documents and the pieces of myself I refused to leave behind. Maya helped me carry boxes into her garage, her quiet presence reminding me I wasn't alone. That night, as I lay on the spare bed in her guest room, I thought about the word karma. For months I had been swallowing bitterness, praying for justice. And now justice had begun to stir. It was imperfect, messy, and terrifying, but it was real. The wounds James left in me would take time to heal. The betrayal ran deep, braided with every memory of what I thought was love. But for the first time I believed healing was possible, because I had chosen survival. The first court summons came 2 weeks later. By then I had settled into Maya's guest room. My belongings stacked in neat piles against the wall, my nights still broken by dreams of bitterness seeping into my veins. But every morning, I woke with a little more clarity. Every morning, I told myself I had survived. When the letter arrived, bold black print against stark white paper, I felt a strange mixture of fear and vindication. It was real now, not just whispers, not just suspicion, but the law pulling James into the light he had avoided for so long. The courtroom was cold, lined with wood paneling that seemed to swallow sound. James stood at the defendant's table, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. He looked older than his 32 years, as though guilt had aged him by decades. His lawyer whispered furiously in his ear, but James barely seemed to hear. The prosecutor read aloud the evidence, the toxicology report showing traces of rodenticide, the video of his whispered admission, my medical history pointing to repeated mysterious illnesses. My chest tightened as they replayed the clip of him saying, "That wasn't supposed to be your cup." Gasps rippled through the gallery. James's face turned crimson. His lawyer tried to argue. This was a mistake, a slip of the tongue, an unfortunate coincidence. "My client's wife has a history of paranoia and anxiety." My lawyer rose swiftly. "Paranoia doesn't poison coffee. Paranoia doesn't create tremors and toxicology reports. Facts do, and the facts point to James Harrison." The judge's gavel cracked once, silencing the room. I watched James, then watched the man I had once trusted with my heart, my life. His eyes darted between the papers in front of him and the floor, anywhere but me. For the first time he couldn't weave a story, couldn't gaslight me into silence. The truth was louder than his lies. When court adjourned for the day, I stepped outside into the cool air, the sound of traffic filling my ears. Reporters lingered at the courthouse steps, microphones ready, questions sharp. "Did you suspect your husband for long? Do you think your sister-in-law was involved?" I ignored them, my steps steady. I wasn't here for spectacle, I was here to reclaim my life. But the nights after those hearings were the hardest. I'd lie awake at my eyes, staring at the ceiling, replaying every smile James had ever given me. How many of them were real? How many were masks hiding calculation? Grief tangled with rage inside me, a storm I didn't know how to calm. One night, unable to sleep, I opened the box of evidence again, the urgent care bills, the photos, the text logs. I studied them like they belonged to someone else's life. And then I realized this wasn't just proof of what James had done, it was proof of what I had endured, what I had survived. Nina's role in everything remained murky. She had given her statement to the police, claiming she had no idea what James was planning, but her words in the hospital haunted me. "It wasn't supposed to be you." Whether she was complicit or just a pawn, I didn't know. Perhaps I never would. But I decided then that she no longer had any place in my life. Betrayal, intentional or not, still left scars. The second week of trial brought a new wave of revelations. The prosecution produced receipts, purchases James had made online of chemical compounds not meant for human consumption. My stomach lurched as the evidence piled higher, but it also solidified my resolve. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated. The truth was undeniable. James, in his desperation, tried to reach me. He sent letters through his lawyer, pleas, scrawled in his handwriting. "We can fix this. Don't ruin both our lives. Think of everything we shared." I tore each one into shreds. He had already ruined everything we shared. By the time closing arguments began, the man who once thought he controlled my fate sat slumped and silent, his lies dismantled piece by piece. I watched him and felt, not triumph but something colder, a severing. The last of the ties that had bound me to him snapping one by one. When the judge announced the trial would conclude the following week, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The end was near. That night I wrote in my journal, "Revenge isn't watching him fall. Revenge is standing tall while he crumbles." And for the first time, I believed it. The last day of the trial felt heavy, like the air itself carried the weight of everything unsaid. I sat at the front of the courtroom, my palms flat against my knees, my breath steady but shallow. James entered in the same wrinkled suit, his eyes darting nervously as though searching for one last way out. But there was none. The gavel cracked and the judge began. The prosecution spoke first, laying out the story in simple, brutal strokes. The pattern of my unexplained illnesses, the purchases of chemicals, the toxicology report, the recording of his whispered confession. "This is not the story of paranoia," the prosecutor said, his voice rising. "This is the story of a calculated betrayal. A husband who used the intimacy of trust to orchestrate harm. James's lawyer tried again to soften the blow, painting him as a man under pressure, a husband in a crumbling marriage who made poor choices. But the words sounded hollow against the avalanche of evidence. Even James seemed to know it. He sat with his head bowed, shoulders caving inward, as though he could fold himself into nothing. Then it was my turn. They asked if I wanted to deliver a statement. My legs trembled as I stood, but my voice came out clear. For months I thought I was losing my mind. I began. Every time I ended up sick, I told myself it must be me, that I was weak, that I was imagining things. That's what he wanted me to believe. But the truth was worse. The truth was that the man I married, the man I trusted, was the one hurting me, poisoning me. Smiling while I swallowed lies along with coffee and tea, I paused, my throat tightening. James lifted his head slightly, his eyes glossy, but I didn't falter. I stand here today not as a victim, but as someone who survived. I survived him, and I will keep surviving long after this trial is over. But I want this court to remember, betrayal doesn't just break the heart, it breaks the body, the mind, the spirit. And still I am here. The courtroom was silent as I sat down. Even the judge's gavel seemed softer when she struck it. When the verdict came, it was swift, guilty, on multiple counts. The sentencing followed: years in prison, restitution for medical costs, mandatory counseling. It wasn't everything. No punishment could erase the scars he left, but it was enough to mark the truth. Enough to remind him that his power was gone. James didn't look at me as they led him away. He stared at the floor, a man smaller than the shadow he once cast. For a moment I thought I might feel vindicated, but what I felt was emptiness. Revenge didn't taste like triumph. It tasted like silence after a storm. In the weeks that followed, I focused on building again. I moved into a small apartment of my own, its walls bare at first, then slowly filled with plants, books, photos, pieces of me that had nothing to do with him. Nina left the city. I never saw her again. Maybe she was running from guilt, or maybe from the reflection of herself in my eyes. Either way, she was gone, and that was its own kind of closure. Healing wasn't linear. There were nights I woke sweating, convinced I smelled that strange metallic tang again. Days when I questioned how I could have missed the signs, how I could have loved someone so capable of cruelty. But there were also mornings when sunlight streamed through my window, and I felt peace in my chest. Afternoons when laughter with Maya reminded me I wasn't broken, just reshaped. I started journaling daily, writing not just about pain, but about resilience. I planted herbs on my balcony. Mint, basil, rosemary, small reminders that not everything we consume hides a threat. Sometimes as I sipped tea I brewed myself, I felt the tiniest spark of joy, fragile but real. Looking back, I realized the lesson wasn't only about betrayal. It was about the way we bury our instincts to keep peace, to hold love, to avoid the truth. I had silenced my own body for too long, dismissing its cries for help. Now I vowed never to do that again. One evening, months later, I stood on that balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. I whispered aloud, as if speaking to the younger version of myself. You were right to be afraid. You were right to survive. And you are right to begin again. To anyone listening to my story now, I want to say this. Betrayal may shake you, may cut you to your core, but it does not define you. What defines you is your courage to stand, to speak, to reclaim your life, even when someone you trusted tried to take it away. So if my story has touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who may need to hear it, and subscribe for more. And most of all, leave a comment below. Tell me your story, your scars, your survival. Together we remind each other that we are stronger than the ones who tried to silence us.